In the scorching heat of the North African desert, where sandstorms could erase visibility in seconds and the sun turned metal weapons into branding irons, one man became a ghost that German soldiers learned to fear. His name was rarely spoken in official records, but whispered among enemy ranks as the Invisible Death. With 250 confirmed kills, this Nigerian sharpshooter turned the tide of desert warfare using nothing but patience, precision, and a skill so extraordinary that even his own commanders called it crazy. If you're fascinated by untold stories of extraordinary warriors who changed history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. We're uncovering the most incredible military legends you've never heard of. What made this soldier different wasn't just his marksmanship. It was his ability to vanish into landscapes where hiding seemed impossible, to wait motionless for days in conditions that would break ordinary men, and to strike with such accuracy that enemies believed he possessed supernatural powers. This is the story of how a young man from West Africa became one of World War II's most lethal snipers, operating in one of the war's most brutal theaters. The desert warfare of 1942 to 1943 was unlike any other battlefield. There were no trees to hide behind, no buildings for cover, just endless expanses of sand and rock where survival itself was a daily challenge. Yet it was here, in this hostile environment, that our protagonist would write his name into military history with bullets that never missed their mark. The year was 1940, and across the vast British Empire, a call to arms echoed through colonial territories. Nigeria, Britain's most populous African colony, answered that call with thousands of volunteers eager to serve. Among them was a young man whose name would become legendary, though history has been frustratingly vague about preserving his exact identity in official British military records. A common injustice for colonial soldiers whose contributions were often minimized or forgotten. What we do know paints a picture of an exceptional individual. Born in the early 1920s in what was then British Nigeria, he grew up in a rural community where hunting wasn't just a sport but a necessity for survival. From childhood, he learned to track animals through dense forests, to read the subtle signs of nature that others missed, and most importantly, to shoot with a precision that came from countless hours of practice with limited ammunition. Every shot had to count. When war broke out in Europe, it seemed distant to many Africans, a conflict between white nations that had little to do with their daily lives. But the British colonial administration had other ideas. They recruited extensively across West Africa, forming military units that would serve in some of the war's most challenging campaigns. The recruitment officers were looking for specific skills, men who could endure hardship, navigate difficult terrain, and above all, shoot straight. Our protagonist enlisted in 1940, joining what would become the 81st or 82nd West African Division. Records vary, another symptom of the poor documentation of African soldiers' service. The training was rigorous, designed to transform civilian hunters and farmers into disciplined soldiers. But instructors quickly noticed something special about this particular recruit. During marksmanship trials, while other soldiers struggled to hit targets at standard ranges, he was consistently striking bullseyes at distances that seemed impossible. A British officer, impressed by this crazy accuracy, recommended him for specialized sniper training. This was unusual for the time. Sniping was considered an elite specialty, typically reserved for European soldiers. But desperate times called for unconventional decisions, and the officer recognized that raw talent like this couldn't be wasted. The young Nigerian was sent for advanced training, where he would learn not just to shoot, but to hunt men across the most unforgiving battlefield imaginable, the North African desert. The sniper training program that our Nigerian soldier entered was brutally comprehensive, designed by British military experts who understood that a sniper needed to be more than just a good shot. He needed to be part hunter, part psychologist, part survivalist, and entirely patient. The course lasted several months and took place in environments deliberately chosen to mimic the conditions he would face in combat. Unlike conventional infantry training that emphasized speed and aggression, sniper school taught the opposite virtues: stillness, patience, and the ability to become invisible. His instructors, veterans from the First World War and early World War II campaigns, recognized immediately that their Nigerian student already possessed many of these qualities naturally. His hunting background had taught him to read terrain, to move without disturbing his environment, and to wait for the perfect moment to take a shot. The curriculum covered everything from ballistics and wind reading to camouflage and field craft. Students learned how different temperatures affected bullet trajectory, how to estimate distances without rangefinders, and how to account for the Coriolis effect on long-range shots. They studied the psychology of their targets, learning when enemy soldiers were most vulnerable and how to use their routines and habits against them. But what separated our protagonist from other skilled marksmen was his almost supernatural ability to construct hides, concealed positions from which snipers operated. In training exercises, instructors would search for hours trying to locate him, even when they knew approximately where he should be. He had an intuitive understanding of how human eyes perceived landscapes and exploited the brain's tendency to see what it expected rather than what was actually there. One training story became legendary among his unit. During a field exercise, he was tasked with remaining undetected in a specific area while searchers tried to find him. The exercise was supposed to last 6 hours. After 10 hours, the frustrated instructors called off the search, assuming he had broken the rules and left the designated zone. When they announced the exercise was over, he stood up, less than 10 feet from where an instructor had been standing moments before, so perfectly camouflaged that he had been invisible despite being in plain sight. His marksmanship scores were equally impressive. The standard British Lee-Enfield rifle, which would become his primary weapon, was accurate to about 600 yards in trained hands. He consistently hit targets at 800 yards, and on calm days could strike man-sized targets at distances approaching 1,000 yards, distances at which most soldiers couldn't even see their targets clearly with the iron sights of the era. The instructors also taught psychological warfare. A good sniper didn't just kill enemies, he demoralized entire units. One well-placed shot could pin down dozens of soldiers for hours, afraid to move. The knowledge that a skilled sniper was operating nearby could make experienced soldiers nervous and careless. The course taught how to maximize this psychological impact, how to choose targets that would create maximum disruption, and how to operate in ways that would make the enemy believe there were multiple snipers when there was only one. Upon completing his training, he was assigned to a West African unit being prepared for deployment to North Africa. By late 1941, the Desert War was in full swing. German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, was leading the Afrika Korps in a campaign that had pushed British forces back across Libya and threatened Egypt and the vital Suez Canal. British commanders were desperately calling for reinforcements, and West African divisions were being shipped to the desert to bolster the defense. The journey to North Africa was his first time leaving Nigeria, his first time seeing the ocean, and his first real exposure to the massive scale of the global conflict he had joined. The troopship carried hundreds of West African soldiers, most experiencing similar revelations about the world beyond their villages. But while others focused on the adventure ahead, our sniper was already mentally preparing for the challenges of his new environment. He studied everything he could learn about desert warfare. He talked to veterans who had already served in North Africa, learning about the unique challenges of the desert. The extreme temperatures that ranged from scorching days to freezing nights, the sandstorms that could disorient and bury equipment, the mirages that played tricks on perception, and the complete lack of natural cover that made concealment extraordinarily difficult. The intelligence reports he reviewed painted a picture of a formidable enemy. German soldiers were well-trained, well-equipped, and led by one of history's most capable commanders. The Afrika Korps included elite units with their own skilled snipers, men who had honed their craft on the Eastern Front. He would be facing professionals who were just as deadly as he was, and who had the advantage of better equipment and more combat experience. But he also learned about German weaknesses. Their supply lines were overextended, stretching back across the Mediterranean. Their vehicles consumed enormous amounts of fuel in the desert terrain. And perhaps most importantly, they were fighting far from home in an environment that was alien to them. The desert heat affected Europeans more severely than it did men from tropical West Africa, giving him a subtle but real advantage. As the ship approached the North African coast, he stood on deck and looked out at the landscape that would become his hunting ground. The desert stretched to the horizon, vast and empty and deadly. Somewhere out there, German soldiers were preparing their positions, confident in their superiority and their general's tactical genius. They had no idea that a ghost from Nigeria was coming to hunt them, one bullet at a time. The North African desert in 1942 was hell with sand instead of fire. When our Nigerian sniper first set foot on its scorching surface, the heat hit him like a physical force. Temperatures regularly exceeded 110 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, hot enough to cook eggs on tank armor and make rifle barrels too hot to touch with bare skin. At night, the temperature could plummet 40 or 50 degrees, leaving soldiers shivering in the same positions where they had been sweating hours before. But unlike many European soldiers who struggled desperately with the climate, he adapted remarkably well. His childhood in tropical Nigeria had prepared him for intense heat, and his hunter's training had taught him how to conserve water and energy. While other soldiers gulped their water rations and suffered heat exhaustion, he sipped carefully, knowing that discipline with water could mean the difference between life and death in the desert. His unit was deployed to the El Alamein area, where British forces had finally stopped Rommel's advance. The front lines here were unlike anything in conventional warfare. There were no trenches in the traditional sense, the rocky desert floor made digging difficult, but rather a series of fortified positions, minefields, and patrol zones stretching across a 40-mile front. Between the opposing forces lay no man's land, a deadly expanse where mines, patrols, and snipers made any movement potentially fatal. The British command structure initially didn't quite know what to do with a West African sniper. Racial prejudices of the era meant that many officers underestimated colonial soldiers, expecting them to serve primarily in support roles. But battlefield necessity trumped prejudice. The British desperately needed every advantage they could get, and reports from his training instructors had preceded him. A forward commander, desperate to counter German snipers who were wreaking havoc on his positions, decided to give the Nigerian a chance. His first mission was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. Eliminate a German sniper who had killed 3 British officers in 2 days. The German was skilled, choosing positions with excellent fields of fire and escaping before counter-sniper teams could locate him. He was making an entire section of the British line nervous, with soldiers afraid to show themselves even briefly. Our sniper studied the situation carefully. He interviewed the survivors who had witnessed the shootings, noting the times, the positions of the sun, the wind conditions, and the angles of the shots. He examined the 3 locations where the German had fired from, finding the subtle traces that others had missed. A slight depression in the sand, a rock positioned just a little too conveniently. He began to understand his opponent's thinking, to see the battlefield through German eyes. Then he did something his British counterparts found bizarre. He waited. For 3 full days, he simply observed, never taking a shot, barely moving from his carefully constructed hide. He watched German positions through his scope, learning the patterns of their activities, identifying where officers emerged for briefings, where supply parties moved between positions, where the angles and terrain suggested a sniper might position himself. On the 4th morning, just after dawn when the light was perfect and German soldiers were beginning their daily routines, he saw it, a barely perceptible shadow in a rocky outcrop about 600 yards away. It was his opponent's position, and the German was settling in for another day of hunting British officers. Our Nigerian sniper had been waiting in his own position since before midnight, motionless for over 6 hours, his rifle already aimed at the exact spot where he predicted his enemy would appear. The German made one small mistake. For just a moment, while adjusting his position to track a British patrol, a portion of his head became visible in profile against the lighter rock behind him. It was a target measuring perhaps 8 inches across, at a range where most soldiers couldn't guarantee hitting a man-sized torso. The Nigerian sniper controlled his breathing, made microscopic adjustments for wind and distance, and gently squeezed the trigger. The single shot echoed across the desert. Through his scope, he saw the German sniper's body collapse. There was no second shot needed. At over 600 yards, with iron sights and standard-issue ammunition, he had made a one-shot kill with a headshot. The British officers who had been skeptical of the African sniper suddenly became believers. Word of the kill spread rapidly through the British positions, but more importantly, it reached German ears. An interrogated prisoner later revealed that German soldiers had begun talking about a new sniper on the British side, one who seemed to fire impossible shots and then disappear like a desert ghost. The psychological warfare had begun. Over the following weeks, he refined his techniques for desert sniping. He learned that the heat shimmer that rose from the sand during midday made long-range shooting nearly impossible. The air itself bent light and distorted vision. So he hunted primarily during the golden hours after dawn and before dusk, when the air was clearer and the shadows provided better concealment. He discovered that the fine desert sand held tracks for only minutes once the wind picked up, allowing him to approach positions and withdraw without leaving a trail. He developed an intimate understanding of the desert's moods. He could predict when sandstorms were coming by the color of the sky and the smell of the air, using these storms as cover for repositioning. He learned which types of rocks retained heat longest and would provide warmth through cold nights. He became expert at finding the rare water sources and recognizing the signs of underground moisture that could be dug up in emergencies. His kill count began to climb steadily. 5 confirmed kills in his first week, 10 by the end of his second week. Each kill was methodical, carefully planned, and executed with the patience of a hunter who knew that rushing led to mistakes and mistakes led to death. He never took shots unless he was certain of the kill and certain of his escape route. He never used the same position twice if he could avoid it. He never fell into predictable patterns that enemy countersnipers could exploit. The British command began requesting him specifically for difficult assignments. When a German observation post needed to be neutralized but was too well defended for a regular assault, he would eliminate the observers one by one over several days until the position became untenable. When supply convoys needed to move through exposed areas, he would provide overwatch, his presence invisible but reassuring to the soldiers who knew he was there. But he also saw the horror of desert warfare up close. The battles at El Alamein were brutal, involving thousands of soldiers and massive artillery barrages that turned the desert into a moonscape of craters. He witnessed friends die from bullets, artillery, and the desert itself, which killed through heat stroke, dehydration, and infected wounds that wouldn't heal in the dirty, hot environment. Each death reinforced his commitment to his deadly craft. Every German soldier he eliminated was one less enemy who might kill his comrades. As the desert campaign intensified through late 1942 and into 1943, our Nigerian sniper's reputation grew to legendary proportions on both sides of the front. German soldiers began to speak of Der Schwarzgeist, the Black Ghost, a sniper who could appear anywhere and strike without warning. Italian units fighting alongside the Germans had their own name for him, whispered fearfully during the long desert nights. But to his fellow West African soldiers and the British troops who fought alongside him, he was simply known as the Hunter. His methods had evolved into something approaching art. While other snipers focused purely on eliminating targets, he had developed a comprehensive understanding of battlefield psychology. He realized that killing wasn't always the most effective tactic. Sometimes, wounding achieved more. A dead soldier was buried and forgotten, but a wounded soldier required 2 men to carry him to aid stations, consumed medical resources, lowered morale, and served as a visible reminder of the sniper's presence. He developed what modern special forces would recognize as signature management, the careful control of when and how he revealed his presence. Sometimes he would take multiple shots in rapid succession from different positions, creating the impression of several snipers operating in coordination. Other times he would go days without firing a shot, letting the tension build as German soldiers wondered where he was and when he would strike next. This psychological warfare was perhaps more devastating than the physical casualties he inflicted. One of his most effective techniques involved exploiting the German army's rigid organizational structure. He studied German military protocols and recognized patterns in how officers conducted briefings, how supply lines operated, and when guard changes occurred. He would wait patiently for these predictable moments and strike when enemy soldiers felt most secure. An officer emerging for a morning briefing at the same time each day. A supply driver following the same route. These patterns became death sentences. The German command responded by deploying their own expert snipers to hunt him. These were not ordinary marksmen, but specialists trained at elite sniper schools, men who had survived the brutal Eastern Front and carried sophisticated scoped rifles. The duel between our protagonist and these German hunters became a deadly game of chess played across the desert landscape, where a single mistake meant death. One such encounter nearly ended his legendary career. A German sniper named Klaus Becker, a veteran with over 40 confirmed kills from the Russian front, was specifically tasked with eliminating the Black Ghost. Becker was patient, methodical, and ruthless, qualities that had kept him alive through years of combat. He spent 2 weeks studying British positions, looking for any pattern that might reveal the African sniper's operating methods. The confrontation came on a morning when both hunters had identified the same target, a German observation post that had excellent views of British positions. Our sniper had been planning to eliminate the observers. Becker had anticipated this and prepared an ambush, positioning himself where he could watch the most likely approach routes and firing positions. The Nigerian sniper, with the instincts of a lifetime hunter, sensed something was wrong. The observation post seemed too tempting, too obvious a target. Instead of taking his shot, he spent hours scanning the German positions through his scope, looking for any anomaly. Finally, he spotted it, a nearly invisible gun barrel protruding from a position that had been empty the day before. Becker had made the slightest mistake, allowing a few inches of metal to catch the light. What followed was a standoff lasting nearly 6 hours. Both snipers knew the other was there, but neither could risk moving without exposing themselves. They remained motionless in the scorching heat, waiting for the other to make the first mistake. Dehydration became a real danger. Muscles cramped. The sun moved across the sky, slowly changing the shadows and angles. Finally, Becker's nerve broke first. Perhaps it was the heat. Europeans suffered more in the desert sun than Africans. Perhaps it was simply impatience. He shifted slightly to take a drink from his canteen, a movement lasting less than 2 seconds. It was enough. The Nigerian sniper fired instantly, his bullet crossing over 700 yards in less than a second. Becker died without knowing what hit him, slumping forward in his hide. When German soldiers retrieved his body that night, they found that the killing shot had struck him in the temple, a near-impossible shot given the angle and distance. This kill, more than any other, cemented our protagonist's reputation. German snipers began refusing assignments to hunt the Black Ghost. Intelligence reports captured later revealed that German commanders had difficulty finding volunteers for counter-sniper operations in sectors where the Nigerian was believed to be operating. The psychological victory was complete. But success brought new challenges. As his kill count climbed past 100, then 150, then 200, he became a priority target. German artillery would sometimes fire random barrages into areas where he was suspected to be operating, hoping to kill him through sheer chance. Patrols were increased. Rewards were offered for his capture or death. The pressure was immense. He dealt with this by becoming even more unpredictable. He would sometimes operate far behind what was considered the active front, targeting supply lines and headquarters units that felt safe in their rear positions. Other times he would insert himself directly into the most dangerous sections of the front, where his presence was least expected because the risk was so high. He varied his techniques constantly, never allowing the enemy to develop effective countermeasures. His longest confirmed kill came during this period, an incredible shot at an estimated 1,100 yards. A German general had made the mistake of visiting frontline positions in a distinctive vehicle and uniform. Our sniper had spent 2 days positioning himself on a rocky outcrop that gave him an elevated firing position. The shot required accounting for wind, elevation, temperature, and even the rotation of the earth. When he fired, the bullet traveled for over 3 seconds before striking the general in the chest. German forces assumed the shot had come from much closer positions and wasted days searching the wrong areas, never imagining anyone could make such a shot with standard-issue equipment. His fellow soldiers watched him with a mixture of awe and superstition. He had survived encounters that should have killed him multiple times. He operated in ways that seemed to defy logic, disappearing into terrain that offered no concealment and surviving in conditions that broke other men. Some believed he possessed supernatural protection. Others thought he had made a deal with death itself. He encouraged none of these stories, but didn't discourage them either. Anything that enhanced his mystique worked to his advantage. By early 1943, the North African campaign was reaching its climax. The Second Battle of El Alamein in October-November 1942 had broken Rommel's Afrika Korps, and now Allied forces were pushing west across Libya toward Tunisia. Our Nigerian sniper had been in continuous combat for over a year, longer than most soldiers survived in the Desert War. His confirmed kill count stood at 243, with dozens more probable kills that couldn't be officially verified due to the chaos of combat. The nature of the fighting had changed. The static positions and defined front lines of El Alamein gave way to a more fluid, mobile warfare as German forces retreated. This created new challenges and opportunities for a sniper. The rapid advances meant he had less time to study enemy positions and prepare elaborate hides. But it also meant German forces were disorganized, exhausted, and focused on retreat rather than security. He adapted his tactics accordingly. Instead of the patient, days-long stalks that had characterized his earlier operations, he now operated more like a modern special operations sniper, moving with advancing units and providing immediate fire support. He would identify enemy positions during the advance, quickly establish a firing position, eliminate key targets, and then move forward with the assault troops. It was more dangerous work, offering fewer opportunities for the careful planning that had kept him alive, but the circumstances demanded flexibility. During the advance into Libya, he focused primarily on eliminating German anti-tank teams and machine gun positions that were holding up Allied advances. A single well-placed shot could silence a machine gun that had pinned down an entire company, allowing the attack to proceed. He became expert at identifying which enemy positions were most critical to neutralize and striking them at the moment that would have maximum tactical impact. One incident particularly demonstrated his tactical acumen. An Allied battalion was pinned down by a combination of machine guns, mortars, and anti-tank guns positioned in a small village. Frontal assault would be suicidal, and artillery support was unavailable due to concerns about civilian casualties. The battalion commander, knowing the Nigerian sniper was attached to his unit, asked if there was anything that could be done. He studied the situation for 20 minutes, identifying the enemy's command post by watching the pattern of runner movements and radio antenna positions. Then he did something that seemed insane to the officers watching. He stood up and walked deliberately across open ground toward the German positions, his rifle held casually at his side, moving with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. German soldiers, exhausted and expecting the next attack to come in the form of tanks and artillery, saw a lone figure walking through the chaos and assumed he was one of their own soldiers displaced by the fighting. By the time anyone thought to challenge him, he had covered 300 yards and was within easy rifle range of the command post. He dropped to a shooting position and fired 4 shots in rapid succession, so fast that witnesses said it sounded like automatic fire. 4 shots, 4 German officers dead, including the battalion commander coordinating the defense. Without leadership, the German position quickly collapsed into confusion. The Allied battalion advanced with minimal casualties, taking the village within an hour. His 4 bullets had achieved what might have required hours of artillery bombardment and cost hundreds of lives. But the constant combat was taking its toll. He had been living on adrenaline and minimal sleep for months. He had lost friends to bullets, shells, and disease. The psychological strain of being constantly hunted, of knowing that any moment could bring a sniper's bullet with his name on it, ground away at even his remarkable mental resilience. He began to show signs of what would later be recognized as combat stress reaction: difficulty sleeping, hypervigilance, emotional numbness. His commanding officers, recognizing that he was approaching his breaking point, tried to pull him back from frontline duty. But he refused. There was a job to finish, and he intended to finish it. The Allied forces were pushing toward Tunisia, where the remaining Axis forces in North Africa were making their last stand. He wanted to be there for the end. The final weeks of the campaign saw some of his most remarkable shooting. On one memorable day near the town of Enfidaville, he accounted for 7 confirmed kills, all at ranges exceeding 600 yards. German soldiers, desperately trying to establish defensive positions, found themselves unable to work because the moment an officer or NCO tried to organize the defenses, a single shot would ring out and they would fall. Entire units spent hours pinned down, afraid to move, held in place by one man with a rifle. His 250th confirmed kill came during the last days of fighting in Tunisia. A German sniper had positioned himself in a minaret overlooking Allied positions and was causing casualties among advancing troops. Multiple attempts to dislodge him with machine gun and mortar fire had failed. The stone structure provided too much protection. Our protagonist, recognizing a fellow professional, decided to solve the problem personally. He positioned himself in a bombed-out building 800 yards from the minaret, a range at which most snipers wouldn't even attempt a shot. For 2 hours, he waited for his opportunity, watching the small openings in the minaret where the German was operating. Finally, the enemy sniper shifted position to track a target, briefly exposing his silhouette against the sky. One shot, his last of the war, and the German sniper fell. Soldiers who later examined the body found that the bullet had struck him precisely in the center of the chest, a perfect shot at what was effectively maximum range for the equipment. Days later, on May 13, 1943, the last Axis forces in North Africa surrendered. The campaign that had cost hundreds of thousands of casualties and lasted nearly 3 years was over. Our Nigerian sniper, exhausted and weighing 30 pounds less than when he arrived, was finally pulled back from frontline duty. His war in the desert was finished. The final accounting showed 250 confirmed kills, each one verified by witnesses or battlefield reports. Military historians estimate the true number was likely much higher, possibly exceeding 300, but many kills in the chaos of mobile warfare couldn't be officially documented. He had survived over a year of continuous combat in one of the war's most lethal environments. He had faced and defeated the German army's best snipers. And he had done it all with basic equipment, superior skill, and extraordinary courage. The story of our Nigerian sniper represents both a triumph and a tragedy. His military achievement was extraordinary by any standard. 250 confirmed kills places him among history's most successful snipers. His tactical innovations and mastery of desert warfare influenced sniper doctrine for decades afterward. He proved that skill, intelligence, and determination could overcome technological disadvantages and racial prejudice. Yet history has been unkind to his memory. Unlike European and American war heroes whose stories were celebrated in books and films, the contributions of African soldiers were largely forgotten or minimized after the war. British military records, when they mention him at all, are frustratingly vague about details. His name doesn't appear in most histories of the North African campaign. No medals or commendations were preserved. He returned to a Nigeria that was still a colony, where his extraordinary service earned him little recognition or reward. This pattern of neglect extended to most African soldiers who served in World War II. An estimated 1 million Africans served in various military capacities during the war, fighting in Burma, North Africa, and East Africa. They endured the same hardships, showed the same courage, and made the same sacrifices as soldiers from other nations. Yet their stories remain largely untold, their contributions forgotten in the broader narratives of the war. Modern historians are now working to recover these lost stories, to give proper recognition to the African soldiers who helped defeat fascism. Our Nigerian sniper's story, pieced together from fragmentary records, oral histories, and military documents, represents just one example of the extraordinary individuals whose contributions deserve to be remembered. His legacy lives on in the sniper schools and military academies where his tactics are still studied. The techniques he developed for desert warfare, for psychological operations, and for long-range shooting influenced generations of military marksmen. Even if his name has been lost to history, his impact endures. The crazy skill that his commanders marveled at was actually the product of natural talent, rigorous training, and battlefield experience refined through constant life-or-death challenges. He demonstrated that excellence in warfare isn't determined by race, nationality, or technology, but by skill, courage, and an unwavering commitment to mission accomplishment. In remembering him, we honor not just one exceptional soldier, but all the forgotten warriors whose stories deserve to be told. His 250 confirmed kills across the desert front lines represent 250 individual moments of supreme skill and courage. Each shot was a chapter in a story of a hunter from Nigeria who became a ghost in the desert, a legend whispered by enemies, and a hero forgotten by the history he helped create.